Howdy partners, it's so good to be here again. I haven't been feeling too well the last few days, but I'm on the mend. And so it is now time to talk about Eddington, one of the most anticipated and controversial films of the year. Anticipated because this is the latest film from Ari Aster, someone who is considered to be one of the most visionary new filmmakers working in modern horror cinema today. He debuted with two excellent indie horror films, Hereditary and Midsommar, a real 1-2 punch that defined the last years of the 2010s decade when it comes to indie art house horror cinema. And then his third film, Beau is Afraid, is one that got a lot of mixed reception, but in my books I consider it to be a bit of a masterpiece. Truly one of the most deranged films I've ever seen in my life. And now he's back with his fourth film, Eddington, tapping into the Western genre, as well as having a very modern take on the horror genre with the COVID pandemic. There are no monsters or jump scares, just a nightmare-inducing chaos and confusion we all lived through just a few years ago. It's hard to believe we already passed 5 years since then. On one hand, it feels like it was just yesterday, but on the other hand, it feels like it was lifetimes ago. In any case, at the surface level, the film tells the story of this contested mayoral election between Sheriff Joe Cross and current Mayor Ted Garcia, who is up for re-election and he is currently enforcing the mask mandates. And so he is the more left-leaning type of politician. And early on in the film, there's an incident at the grocery store because of the mask mandate, which is the initial spark that causes our protagonist Joe Cross to take this leap of faith into his new political career. He sees as yet another attack on his freedom and another era where he's losing control in his life, which there doesn't seem to be all that much of it as is. And I love the scene where there's this Mexican standoff between Joe Cross and Ted Garcia. Joe clings on to his sheriff hat for dear life, as if it is an essential part of his identity, which he can't lose control of either. Another element that I find fascinating in this Western is that the weapon of choice ain't the revolver, but rather the cell phone. Even in that Mexican standoff that I just mentioned, Joe Cross comes out recording the altercation. Everyone is recording, posting on TikTok or Instagram to weaponize the info that they have against our opposing viewpoints. And you better believe that there's a lot of internet sleuthing into conspiracy theory rabbit holes. Plenty of that in this film as well. But one element that I thought was really interesting in this use of technology and how it further divides people who should be friends. Kids are literally using pictures to hurt their friends through jealousy. There's this one particular youth, Brian, who I feel gets manipulated into adopting these kind of woke viewpoints in the hopes of getting into the good graces of this young activist. And we'll say that girl seems to have genuine conviction behind her activist views. But I would say for Brian, it's a different story. And his entire arc, especially the way it ends, is a surprising one. And I find it highlights yet another facet of this identity crisis soup that we get to revisit in the year of 2020. And of course, another major event in 2020 was of course the Black Lives Matter protests, which just adds more turmoil on an already chaotic and incomprehensible situation. And our protagonist being a sheriff, you can imagine just how uncomfortable that was for them. But this is one of the branches of the film that I feel it doesn't explore quite thoroughly enough. The film even opens yet another Pandora's box when it comes to sexual predators, a topic that's still very much apropos in our modern times today in 2025, especially with the whole Epstein bombshell that just never seems to stop, and for good reason, mind you. And that part of the story is centered around Emma Stone's character, who's playing Louise, Joe Cross's wife. Many have complained that for such a talented actress, she doesn't get much screen time or room to breathe as an actress, which I have to admit there is some truth to that. However, on the flip side, I do think she serves the needs of this very emotionally damaged, shell-shocked human being. And I think the most noteworthy scene in regards to her character arc is the moment where Austin Butler enters their lives. He plays this radical cult leader who has now found his latest victim to manipulate. If you pay close attention, there's some really subtle details that reveal some key details about her life story. It's some chilling stuff to say the least. So as you can see, there's a lot loaded into this film. And even at 2.5 hours long, the film is absolutely bursting at the seams. And I'm not even covering everything. And I know another point of criticism that many have levied towards this film is that the film is too centered in its political view and it doesn't exactly take a side. But I can't really agree with that assessment. I think Ari Aster's purpose here is to show just the chaotic reality of life in 2020, where it was just impossible to align with anyone, wherever on the political grayscale they may be found. It is a nightmare situation where we wage emotional violence on our friends, neighbors, family even, and ourselves. I feel like there's this constant aura of guilt and shame that stalks Joe Cross's character throughout the whole film, until he reaches his breaking point, which is a very pitiful and tragic sight to see. At that point in the film, things go totally off the rail. Yeah, the structure of the film really is kind of a downward spiral. And I will say, for me, this is not a fun movie to watch. Many in the crowd are laughing, and I do see a lot of comments on the internet saying they found the film surprisingly funny. But personally, I was deeply uncomfortable throughout the whole film. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do see the satire and the message of the film, in the way it holds up this broken mirror into our face of what it was like to live during that pandemic. But I guess I'm just still in shock of all that happened a few years ago. Still a very bitter pill to swallow, so yeah. No chuckles for me on this one. Now, in terms of the craft, I love the cinematography. And the cinematographer, Darius Kanji, seems to be a bit of a legend. He's worked on a bunch of films that I totally love. He's got 2 Oscar nominations, most recently for that last Alejandro González Iñárritu film, Bardo and the False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths. He also worked on some David Fincher films such as Seven and Panic Room, or more recently, Midnight in Paris, Amour, Uncut Gems. He even worked on Bong Joon-ho on Okja, and even this year for Mickey 17. The dude has been cooking. In any case, back to Eddington, the close-ups on the characters' faces are emotionally resonant to me. You can feel the stress just boiling beneath the surface. The landscapes are oftentimes breathtaking, the empty streets are immersive, and that harrowing ambience that we all experienced during the pandemic, but it also pairs itself perfectly well with that empty western town, where danger is lurking at every corner. And the nighttime sequences are some of my favorite moments, cinematographically speaking, in the film. There's one moment in particular where we see Joe Cross just totally covered in this red light. There's some great moments, visually speaking, in this film. I'd say my only real issue happens later on in the film. I did mention that there's a darker turn where the film goes a little bit off the rails, and I don't mean that necessarily in a bad part, but there is one sequence where I can only describe it as a ramble sequence. It's a little over the top, and I guess this is America where there's just guns everywhere, especially that caliber of gunfire. Jesus fucking Christ. But I do feel it kind of goes against that idea of that cell phone western that the film seemed to be building for me in my mind. Though I guess in some sense it was a bit of a spectacular ending. And then when I thought the film was over, there was a surprising epilogue that continued for a decent amount of time. At the time, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. I had mixed feelings, but now that I had some time to just sit on it and reflect, it's grown a lot on me. I know I'm going a little bit into spoiler territory over here, but I do think it's worth commenting on. There is this sense of injustice for many of the characters, and also for us viewers, how everything just gets thrown on the rug after all that shit we've seen in the last chapter of the film. And then the final shot perfectly bookends this fiasco of a film experience. And after all that chaos, tech billionaire still reigns supreme with this brain-dead politician in place, literally being this puppet on a string. Sound familiar? I thought so. This might not be Ari Aster's best film. It's a bit of a messy experience if I'm honest. Though to be fair, 2020 was a messy and chaotic year as they come. Definitely one for the history books. But boy does this film capture the chaos that life was like in that year. As far as I'm concerned, this is the definitive pandemic film that explores American life that we wish we could all forget. Let alone explore such a culturally divisive topic for film. Which is why I'm ranging from a 7.5 out of 10 to an 8. A lot of people are gonna hate this one, and I guess that should be expected. But I gotta take off my hat to Ari Aster for getting his hands dirty with this subject, and in such a thought-provoking way too. So with all that being said, wishing you and your loved ones nothing but the best. Take care and talk to you soon.